Looking after preschool children is a major source of income for black women, but much like domestic workers, their work is not always recognized and they have few ways to progress further. Now, the limited research on early childhood development practitioners, of course, and their learning pathways is testament to just how neglected these women are. Now, to discuss this, I'm joined by the director of the Center for Early Childhood Development, Eric Atmore. Thank you so much, Eric, for joining me this evening. The forgotten women indeed. I was very shocked to find out that ECD workers earn as little as 1,000 to maybe 2,000 rand a month. That's very shocking. Let's first start there. Why is this the case?
Baron, good evening, and good evening to your viewers. This has been the case historically, and it's because early childhood development is not really valued. It's not valued by politicians, by government. It's not valued by decision makers. And this reflects not only in the poor salaries for these 198,000 ECD workers in South Africa, but also in the long hours they work, the trying and difficult conditions. So it's simply a reflection of the lack of concern and the lack of priority for early childhood development.
And, you know, Eric, when I read about the ECD practitioners and the work that they do, it's not really, easy work. And like you said, the hours are also, it's harsh. It's 6 to 6, basically, 6 in the morning to 6 in the evening. Then, of course, at the end of the day, these workers would like to, get further qualification and they would like to upskill themselves in some way or another. But that path for them also seems to be very difficult.
Baron, more than 50% of our adults working with young children in an early childhood development center are not qualified. Now, this again is a reflection of the history of our country and the educational neglect when people of color were denied opportunities for training and for advancement. It's also very difficult to proceed and get to a point where the salaries that an early childhood development worker would get is equivalent to what a primary school or a high school teacher would be paid. Most of our teachers are qualified at NQF, that's the National Qualifications Framework, level 4 to 5. There will be some on level 6. Now, these are fairly modest qualifications, and the salaries that go with that are poor. But the real reason why salaries are so low is that communities cannot afford to pay more. You mentioned 1,000 to 2,000 rand a month. There are teachers who earn less, not that many, but a few thousand, as little as 600 rand a month. And that is shocking, where these ECD workers are working 12 hours a day, as you mentioned. They're traveling long distances. They carry huge responsibility. The average ECD worker works with 19 children in her group. And it's a huge responsibility to care for 19 children, to prepare activities and lesson plans, and to do the job properly. So they really are a neglected, and one could even go so far as to say it's a sector that has been abused historically.
But, it seems like, being an ECD worker or when I take a look at communities, it seems like this is a very important role that ECD workers play in communities. And I think President Cyril Ramaphosa himself said that, this could possibly be a great way to create jobs in communities where it's needed. But then, of course, it seems like there's a lack of policy when it comes to ECD workers, how much they should be earning and the hours they should be working. What can be done to resolve this?
Look, there's no clear teacher policy for early childhood development. The overwhelming majority of our 42,000 ECD centers around the country are privately run, meaning it's a community group that's got together and they've started an early childhood development center. And even though they fall under the regulations of the various local and provincial authorities, there's no coherent policy about advancing these early childhood centers. There is a very, very small subsidy of 17 Rand per qualifying child per day, but that's only for children whose parents are really at the lowest level of the income spectrum. So even if that whole or the full amount of the subsidy was paid over as a salary, those teachers would still earn way below the national minimum wage. There are things that can be done. Firstly, we need to get the politicians on board. The president himself has to come on board and be an advocate for young children. But then the education department, which in recent years has taken over early childhood development, needs to get a coherent teacher and employment policy in place. There's no such thing. It's left to the early childhood development centers. So we'll get huge variation. In the affluent areas, teachers will earn more, but in the poorer areas, that's where you earn 800 Rand a month. So government has to come to the party, and I'm afraid up until this point they have not. But what this program, what your initiative is going to do, it's going to make us think about how do we build that ECD workforce and how do we ensure that they get the conditions of service which go with the very difficult task of caring for 1.6 million children every single day.
And let's talk about, the route for an ECD worker to get to a level of higher education, because that route for them sometimes seems to be very difficult as well. From what I understand is that there's only one route to higher education for ECD practitioners, and this is through recognition of prior learning, the RPL program. Please tell us more about that and why this is so difficult.
Well, we need to go back a bit. Many years ago, Professor Atmore, when he was the education minister, closed all the early childhood development teacher training colleges. And this was a huge setback. One can proceed through to tertiary education to get a tertiary qualification, but it is complex, it is time-consuming, and it is very expensive. Teachers need time off, they need hours for study, they lose salary when they're away from the early childhood center, and it's very difficult. They can go for recognition of prior learning, what is commonly known as RPL, but that system is not necessarily easier. What that system does is it takes into account prior learning and prior experience, which the ECD teacher has. And it's a bureaucratic process done by tertiary institutions, and very, very few level 4 and level 5 ECD teachers are taking that up because of all the obstacles in its way.
I read something where it was also said that during the COVID-19 pandemic, ECD practitioners were sort of looked over. They weren't really regarded as teachers as such, which is very, very problematic if you think back now. I can't imagine what they had to go through during that time. Please tell us more about those struggles they must have faced. And just thinking also that many of these women are also heads of households. So during that time must have been very difficult.
It certainly was. First of all, early childhood development centers were closed for several months. And we had to go to court. We had to get a high court authority to force the Minister of Social Development at the time, who had responsibility, to open early childhood development centers. Then, when parents did not bring their children back, the income of the center decreased radically, and teachers were not paid. So the majority of teachers during COVID did the work at no salary. And obviously, as you say, these teachers are part of families. They need to eat, they need clothes, they need transport money. That wasn't available. And it was a really tough time. But these women, predominantly women, more than 90% of adults working with young children are female. They are resilient, dedicated, skilled, and committed. And they came through. So the numbers have picked up, and we're almost back to numbers pre-COVID. But it certainly was a difficult time. And the country has a huge debt of gratitude that is needed. And a big thank you to these women, overwhelming women, for what they did for children during COVID. They enabled those children and the families to come through COVID.
Very, very important there to give them that honor and that thanks that they definitely deserve. Thank you so much. Eric Atmore, the director of the Center for Early Childhood Development, for joining us this evening. Of course, you know, very shocking to know that ECD practitioners earn as little as 1,000 to 2,000 rand a month for the work that they do. And there's little to no policy and administrative support in this area to support ECD women, you know, who are leaders in the sector at the end of the day, black women especially. So it is definitely something that needs to be looked at and sorted out as soon as possible, hopefully. Let's